Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Tuesday, August the 25th in the Memorial Arena in Victoria, BC. I'd like to start by thanking the volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes this program happen every week. The first part of Citizens Forum is always the Walt and Jack Show. So Walt will start off with the Canadian election, which is well underway now. And, you know, somebody sent me an email just yesterday or today and used the word charade in it. He sort of called the election a charade. And I feel exactly the same way, and that's the word I'd use. It's almost like none of it is real.
No.
And I'll just give one example. I mean, Stephen Harper's big issue is security. He's always pushing security, right? Okay, fair enough, that's his issue. But this is a story from March 13th, CBC. The story came and disappeared literally within a day or two. It's never been mentioned since. But this is the story about how the Harper government is involved, and everybody remembers, I'm sure, the 3 British schoolgirls who, you know, we saw many, many pictures of them on television. They were in the airport, running away from their homes in Britain, and they went to join ISIS. Now, the story is that those people, those 3 girls, were smuggled into Syria to join ISIS by somebody who claimed to be working for CSIS and claimed to be working specifically for, and you brought this up, the Canadian Embassy in Jordan. And the ambassador to Jordan was, I mean, a guy who was very close to Stephen Harper. So here we have a link between Stephen Harper and smuggling girls to join CSIS, teenagers. And yet that story isn't mentioned not only in the media, but not mentioned by any of the other political parties. So when I say this is down the rabbit hole, this election, that's one example of what I mean.
And the fact that the other parties are not mentioning it, when it has been reported in mainstream media. The Turkish government issued the press releases that they worked off of. They fact-checked that everything the Turkish government was saying. The Turkish government had the hard evidence, they had the videotapes, you know, and you have to realize that Harper's chief security officer, the guy that hung around with him every day, Bruno Sacamani, Harper made him the ambassador to Jordan, the Canadian ambassador, which is unprecedented. Usually they try to keep up a facade of diplomacy. No, he puts a CSIS spy in as the Jordanian ambassador.
And then this guy
and he starts running a CSIS agent in Turkey that's bringing underage schoolgirls into the Syrian
and this agent, in quotation, was just some guy who wanted Canadian citizenship.
Yeah.
And they basically told him, I think, that if you want the citizenship, this is what you got to do. So he started to
It only builds on that other analysis, but most other people agree with that Canada and the U.S. and all others have been financing and created ISIS. And this is just another example of that.
Yeah, and I'll just read a couple of sentences. In a witness statement included in the report, this is the report from Turkey, Rashid claims he worked for Canadian intelligence and traveled occasionally to the Canadian Embassy in Jordan to share information he'd gathered. He claims he relayed information about his trip with the 3 British teens to Canadian intelligence on February 21st and told Turkish authorities his ultimate goal was to obtain Canadian citizenship. So, I mean, what's going on with our election when we don't even know about this? I mean, maybe it's all wrong, but shouldn't there be a discussion, a debate, some information about this story? Because if it's true, then, I mean, it's explosive in terms of what's really going on in this country. And that's another issue about this election. Who runs this country? Is it the people of Canada or is it the corporations of Canada? I think it's the corporations. Shouldn't the issue of who runs the country be a question in this election?
Okay, you just piqued my memory on something else. The people that ran the provincial NDP election, the people that were the strategists and the public relations people for the NDP, that tricked Adrian Dix, and the rest of BCers into believing that the NDP were 20 points ahead, when in fact they were always behind. That campaign team is now working on the Mulcair campaign. And remember when Adrian Dix, they were saying, why don't you bring up all these scandals the Liberals are involved in? He said, no, we're going to keep this campaign clean. Well, guess what? The federal NDP are keeping their campaign clean. The same guys went to Mulcair. Don't bring up all that stuff about Harper, all those, anything that might really, slander him. Let's just keep above.
And let's talk about the truth.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, as far as I know, I believe this is correct, that the national debt increased by $150 billion during the Harper years. And I also believe that Harper ran the single largest deficit in Canadian history.
Yeah.
And yet he presents himself as the guy who's trustworthy on the economy, and there's no questions asked. I mean, Canada is this year running a record trade deficit. We're going to beat the record. So that's Harper's legacy too. And yet he stands up there and says, hey, trust me on the economy. And nobody says a word, not even the Liberals or the NDP. And we don't know what the Greens are saying because they don't get any coverage.
Yeah, but this is all on the theme you were saying that the election is a sham. When you have, Jack, the same public relations firms working for all three major parties, giving them their talking lines, telling them what positions to take, the same people are running all three parties, how does that work?
Yeah.
Well, it works something like the election in BC. Anything could happen. There's nothing can be trusted. Public relations or pollsters, obviously, we're in on the scam here in BC. Those are the same pollsters that are taking polls right now for the federal election.
And the forests are burning. There's no talk about climate change in this election, and there's no talk because all they're focusing on so far is the Duffy trial. And that's the media, right? Will the media get through this entire election without ever discussing in depth and intelligence one issue? I mean, can we Canadians have one issue discussed?
Yeah.
So climate change, taxation policy, the homeless walking our streets and growing poverty, health care. I mean, these are important issues, and yet we're going to go through the war in Syria. I mean, we are at war with Syria. That never gets a mention. So that's where it stands. Sewage treatment?
Well, we have the local issues that we should talk about a little bit. I mean, I'm just going to bring up this article that I just read. It's written by QP, and it's about privatization and issues around the P3 sort of arrangement with running large infrastructure projects.
Okay, now because it's possible that our sewage treatment project could still become a P3, right?
It is a P3 as it stands. The deal's still, they don't know what they're going to build yet, but the old P3 deal's still on the table. Now, I'll just read you a couple of lines I gleaned from this article, and we're going to put it up, and hopefully people will read it. It's very well thought through. Basically, it says the cost of privatization would have added $116 million to Victoria, British Columbia CRD sewage treatment system if the city had continued with plans for P3 sewage treatment. And this is according to research by respected BC forensic accountant Ron Parks. Very solid analysis. That would have cost another $116 million.
To run it as a P3.
If it had we gone with that other crazy idea. Now, virtually all P3s in Canada have been justified on the basis that they are more efficient and transfer risk to the private sector, yet there's no foundation to that claim. In England, a parliamentary report on the Transport Committee concluded that when private companies fail to deliver on large public projects, they just walk away. And the taxpayer inevitably is forced to pick up all the pieces. There's no risk for the private companies. In fact, private-public partnership projects are used to build infrastructure like the sewage treatment plant. Public funds are diverted from core services to corporate profits. Ignoring auditor reports that show massive cost overruns in P3 projects, the federal government has increased funding for PC infrastructure while providing little upfront funding for other projects, and is requiring all major projects to be subject to P3 screening. The bottom line is the feds have no money unless it's a P3 arrangement. And this is what's happened here in
So you
Victoria.
mean the feds won't fund anything
They don't have any
unless
money.
you agree to make it a P3?
You've got to make it a P3
Yeah,
arrangement.
and this is what's happening to our country, and it's not an issue. Why is it
Anyway,
an
I'll
issue?
leave it at that, but we're going to put that up. It's a great analysis of P3s and just how big a ripoff they are. You know, and hopefully...
Where are you going to put it up?
It's a qp.ca / privatization is the thing, and we're going to put it on the screen. But anyway, it's important for the public to know as we proceed, now that we are kind of looking at some other options, that we could drop the P3 and still build it cheaper. Just say no
Just
P3.
say we don't want that money.
It's still going to save us. We're still going to save money. So no matter how you spin it around, it's a bad idea.
I'd like to mention briefly the issue of Elizabeth May not being allowed by the Globe and Mail into their debate. I mean, the Globe and Mail is owned by the Thompson family, Canada's richest family. For that family to put on a debate and then everybody says Elizabeth May can't come, it's an insult to Canada. And I suggest people contact the Globe and Mail, or if you Google Woodbridge Company Limited, that's the holding company for the Thompson family. And if you Google Woodbridge Company Limited, you'll see a phone number up there. I think I found one anyways. And I phoned Woodbridge today, and because I mean you can't, of course. How can you possibly find the Thompsons? You can't.
Yeah.
But the corporation that does have a number, and I left a message for the CEO saying, why isn't Elizabeth May in your debate? I mean, it's a disgrace because Elizabeth May is going to talk about democracy, she's going to talk about a better Canada, and she's going to talk about saving the planet. And the Globe and Mail doesn't want those things discussed. And I guess neither do the other party leaders either.
And Elizabeth does bring up some other tough topics about the shenanigans of the Conservative Party. The sad thing is that the NDP and the Liberals are sucking up to the Globe and Mail, and they're going along with the debate. When, in fact, they should just say, no, this is democracy. We want to include all the major players in this election. The leader of a major political party should be allowed in, or we're not coming.
And I'm a member of the NDP. I would like my party leader and my party to say, we want Elizabeth May in the debate. We want Elizabeth May in the debate, because I think that's how a lot of Canadians feel. In fact, the number I saw was 79% of Canadians wanted her in the debate.
Yeah.
So it's another thing about this charade.
Well, you know, when you go to the polls, you hold your nose a little bit and you vote. I always had to. There's always issues I couldn't agree with on parties. But, you know, the NDP, Mr. Mulcair, you know, at some point, it just stinks too much. They have to realize that they're taking their bet. Their bet is don't give Elizabeth May the profile because she's going to gain votes. We're going to lose a few because we're anti-democratic and we're trying to suppress her message. And they're betting on they're going to win more votes that way. But that only lasts so long. People remember a long, long time. I certainly do. Fundamental issues around democracy and fairness are core values all Canadians have. You don't forget that over a few months. You remember, oh yeah, those guys are willing to do that little trick. Oh, they're in government now. What are they willing to do now? You don't really completely trust them. And it's terrible to spend that sort of, you know, that credibility to gain a few votes. It's just a terrible mistake.
Yeah, I agree. I want to move on to something. I'm on a media list for Saanich, so whenever they're having, you know, their weekly meetings, they always send out just a few lines. And because I'm on that list, I got a couple of other things from Saanich, which were interesting. And Saanich has done a couple of things that I just want to mention, and one is they've put play boxes in parks, in 3 parks, as a kind of experiment, and they may be going into more parks soon, or maybe they're already in more parks. And the box is about the size of what you'd find maybe in a pickup truck if somebody was keeping their tools there. And it's locked, but you can get the combination from Saanich City Hall. You contact them by phone or email or whatever you want. And it's got footballs, baseballs, frisbees, badminton rackets, and all that stuff in it. So when you get to the park, you've got something to play with.
Awesome.
Yeah, I thought, what a great idea. So I really want to commend Saanich for doing that. And I also heard that Saanich is going to be changing the way their city council meetings are held. They may be changing the format of the council chamber itself to make it more welcoming for citizens and to allow a better exchange of information. And I don't know anything more about it, but to me that also sounded very interesting, because I know when you go to your city hall at a meeting, it's funny because the citizens are sitting there kind of in the cheap seats way in the back, and the councilors, I mean, my goodness, some of those rooms are quite spectacular. Yeah. They have a beautiful big table where they all sit in splendor.
Yeah.
And in Victoria, the mayor actually sits, it's almost like a throne with golden arches reaching up to it. It's quite remarkable. I don't know if that's still the case, but it was the case under, for many, many years, including up till last year, I think. So if Saanich can improve upon that, I mean, those are important things. I wish they got more coverage in the media.
Yeah, I'm glad you could find something good to say about Saanich Council. Yeah,
Me too.
They may not be able to undo the mistakes of the past or what their deliberate actions were in the past, but they're going to have to build a lot of sandboxes, Jack, before they're going to get my trust again. I'll let you know.
Well, there is that.
Yeah, they've got a long ways to go yet, but good for them.
Yeah. CFAX, unless you want to talk about the CRD thing?
Well, you know what, I'd like to mention it. I'm going to read a couple of things because I always was wondering what the heck is wrong with the CRD and why doesn't it work? The bottom line is this. The CRD, the Capital Regional District in Victoria, it doesn't have any authority over the local municipalities. They have equal status. The CRD has a status of a municipality, just like Victoria or Saanich, whatever.
So the CRD cannot tell Victoria what to do on a certain issue?
They can't trump anybody. So they're in a big, not only on sewage, but on water supply and all the infrastructure issues around transportation. There's all sorts of, there's a huge void there. Now, where I come from in New Brunswick, we have municipalities and we have counties, and then you have the provincial government. And the counties fill in that gap where you have regional roads and issues around, all these regional issues are all in the jurisdiction of the county. And it solves a lot of these problems, particularly around the issues around amalgamation. We're trying to solve it by talking about amalgamation, which is just another awful idea. I've been talking about electing the CRD, which is not I still think it's better than nothing. But basically, if we had a county that these cities were inside of, we'd have a governance structure that would work. Now, the other problem with all this is that the way people are going to the CRD right now is by being picked by the mayors. There's a whole bunch of room for nepotism and for corruption. My view, that's what we saw with the old sewage treatment plan. I don't know how they could be that.
Well, as a citizen of Victoria, I certainly resented that. Yeah. Even though the people of Victoria were very, very split on that old CRD plan, which was turned down, thank goodness, by Esquimalt, our four representatives from Victoria on the CRD voted almost as a block continuously
Yeah.
to move that CRD plan ahead. They weren't representing the people of the city, and that's what's got to
Well,
change.
they weren't
It should-
accountable, Jack.
but
They're never accountable.
but just as citizens, as the people
Yeah.
we elect, they should represent what we want. I agree with you; they're not, but that's what we have to
even
work
if they
for.
didn't, the thing is that they were doing it in the dark, in the closet. Nobody knew who was voting for what.
Yes, that's very true, because the media lets them get away with it. As
So
long
we
as
had
you're
this
doing-
governance
yeah.
structure, which is so strange and odd, and nobody can understand it. Then they're making these decisions that nobody's reporting on. There's no accountability for the people that were on the CRD that made these terrible, terrible decisions. There's no repercussions. It's like they were almost dumped $1 billion down a big hole.
Well, there's one repercussion. The mayor of Victoria, whose name, Dean Fortin, was just given a very nice position on a very nice a municipal or
Yeah.
a provincial position, I'm not sure which. And the other thing that's happened, even though we're out of time, is the stock market has crashed over the last few days.
yeah.
So by the time this airs, which will be later this week, we'll see how that's looking. Thank you, Walter.
Always a pleasure, Jack.
And thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.